The rain wasn't the worst part. It wasn't the feeling of expensive silk sticking to my skin, or the perfect hair I'd spent an hour on, now plastered to my face. The worst part was the click, the sound of the solid oak door of the DeLuca family penthouse closing behind me. It left me on a marble balcony 30 stories above the city, with a storm raging around me and an even bigger one raging inside me. Just moments before, I'd been standing in their opulent living room, with the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. I was Clara, a 24-year-old paralegal, and I was in love with Liam DeLuca, the charming, kind man I'd been dating for 2 years. And I was, for the very first time, meeting his family. His mother, Isabella DeLuca, a woman who looked like she was carved from ice and draped in diamonds, had yet to look me in the eye. Instead, her gaze just drifted over my dress, a gift from Liam, my shoes, which I'd saved for months to buy, and the simple necklace my own mother had given me. The air was thick with the scent of old money and fresh lilies. Liam's father, Marcus, a gruff man, had shaken my hand with all the enthusiasm you'd show a new toaster. The whole evening was a performance, a silent, brutal judgment. And then came the final act. Isabella, with a smile that never came close to her eyes, handed me a small velvet box. This wasn't a gift. It was a test. Inside was a grotesquely large diamond bracelet. "Liam has extravagant tastes," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We just want to be sure your affections are placed in the right portfolio." The insult was so sharp, so precise, it knocked the wind out of me. She was calling me a gold digger, in front of her son, my boyfriend. I looked at Liam, my heart pleading with him to say something, to defend me, to defend us. He just stood there, a faint, uncomfortable smile on his face. He let out a little laugh, a sound that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "Mum, you're being dramatic," he said, but there was no force behind it. No anger, it was the laugh of a man who secretly agreed with his mother. My blood ran cold. The man I loved, the man I thought loved me, was letting his family dismantle my character, piece by piece. He was choosing them, their money, their world, a world where I clearly wasn't welcome. I don't remember exactly what I said. My voice was quiet, shaking but firm. I told her I couldn't accept her gift. I told her my affections weren't a commodity to be assessed. I looked at Liam one last time, and I didn't see the man I loved. I saw a stranger wearing his face. And that's when his mother, Isabella, said the words that would become the fuel for the fire that was about to ignite inside me. "Of course you can't accept it. It requires a certain breeding to appreciate quality. Perhaps it's best you see yourself out. We have family matters to discuss." Liam didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched as his mother's gesture, a flick of her wrist, dismissed me. Not just from their home, but from his life. So I walked. I walked out of that suffocating room, through the grand foyer, and onto the balcony, thinking it was the way out. But the door to the hallway was locked. It was a private elevator entrance. They had deliberately sent me out into the storm. As I stood there, drenched and humiliated, with the sound of their laughter faintly audible through the thick glass, I made a vow. It wasn't loud. It was a whisper to the storm. They think I want their money? They think I'm a gold digger? Fine. I'll get money. So much money that one day their entire world would be a rounding error on my balance sheet. I wasn't going to just prove them wrong. I was going to rewrite the entire game. They had just thrown me out of their penthouse. One day, I would own the building. That was 8 years ago. My name is Clara, and this is the story of how I went from the girl they threw out in the rain to the woman who became their landlord. The first year was the hardest. The breakup with Liam was like a phantom limb, an ache that would flare up at the worst times. But the humiliation, that was a constant fire. It was the first thing I thought of when I woke up in my tiny rented room, and the last thing that burned behind my eyes as I tried to sleep. I quit my paralegal job. It was too close to that world, a world of serving the rich and powerful. I needed to build, not serve. I took a job as a barista. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, who was accused of wanting a life of luxury, was now steaming milk for $6 an hour before the sun came up. But it was honest, and it was mine. I moved into the cheapest studio I could find, little more than a closet with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. I sold my car, my nice clothes, everything that tied me to my old life. I became a ghost. I worked, I saved, and I learned. Every cent I didn't spend on rent or ramen went into books. Not novels, but books on finance, economics, and wealth management. I devoured them. I spent my nights not on dates or with friends, but in the public library, highlighting passages about market cycles, asset allocation, and, most importantly, real estate. Real estate. The word itself felt solid, tangible. They lived in a tower of glass and steel. They drew their power from property. I decided I would learn that language. The language of deeds, of equity, of leverage. It felt like learning the grammar of power itself. My days were a grueling routine. 4:30 a.m. wake-up, 5 a.m. shift at the coffee shop, 2 p.m. shift at a bookstore, where I got a discount on my new obsession. And from 9 p.m. until I collapsed, I studied. Friends from my old life tried to reach out. They'd heard about the breakup and offered sympathy. I didn't want it. Their world felt soft, and I was trying to make myself hard. I was forging myself into something new in the fires of my own private hell. I lived like this for 2 years. 2 years of aggressive saving, of saying no to every single comfort. My bank account grew with painful slowness, like trying to fill an ocean with a thimble. But it was growing. After 2 years of living on basically nothing, I had saved $22,000. It felt like a fortune, but in the big city real estate market, it was pocket change. I started going to local real estate investor meetups. I was usually the youngest person there, and almost always the only woman who wasn't part of a couple. I'd stand in the back, nursing a cup of water, just listening. I heard them talk about flips, about wholesaling, and about a strategy that came up over and over again. Buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. The concept was electrifying. It wasn't just about buying a property, it was about creating value out of thin air, and then using the bank's money, the equity you created, to do it again. It was a system, a machine for building a portfolio. You weren't just saving your way to wealth, you were using leverage to accelerate it. This was the engine I'd been looking for. I spent the next 6 months laser-focused. I wasn't just looking for any property I could afford. I was looking for the right property for the BRRRR method. It had to be undervalued. It had to be something I could force appreciation on with my own 2 hands if needed. I must have looked at 100 listings. I made dozens of lowball offers that got laughed at. Realtors stopped taking my calls. Banks looked at my barista income and my meager savings and politely showed me the door. It felt like the DeLucas all over again. A system designed to protect those who already had everything. But the memory of that closing door, of the rain on my face, was a relentless motivator. Failure was not an option. Finally, I found it. A studio condo in a dingy, forgotten part of the city. It was hideous. Stained carpets, a greasy nightmare of a kitchen, and it smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. But it was structurally sound, and it was listed for an astonishingly low $75,000 because it had been on the market for months. The owner was desperate. I put in an offer for $70,000, and I wrote a letter, not about my finances, but about my vision. I told him I wasn't a big developer. I was just a young woman who saw potential in his property and was willing to pour my own sweat into bringing it back to life. He accepted. Now for the real hurdle, the bank. My $22,000 was enough for a down payment and closing costs, but I had zero for the rehab. I was rejected by 3 major banks. On my 4th try, I found a small, local credit union and a loan officer named Carol. She was in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She looked at my application, at my 2 jobs, at the numbers I had meticulously prepared, my projected rehab costs, my target rent, my appraisal estimates. She saw the system. "You're trying to blur this, aren't you?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. I was stunned. "Yes," I said. She leaned back. "I've seen a lot of young guys come in here talking big about this. Most of them don't have their numbers straight. You do." She gave me a long, appraising look. "It's a risky play. If you don't hit your appraisal number after the rehab, you won't be able to refinance your capital out, and you'll be stuck." "I'll hit my numbers," I said, with more confidence than I felt. She was quiet for a full minute. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "Everyone deserves a start," she said finally. "And I have a good feeling about you. I'm approving this, but I'm also giving you the number of a good, cheap contractor. Don't you dare let him rip you off." I walked out of that credit union feeling like I could fly. I had the keys. I had the loan. I had my shot. The revenge I swore on that balcony was no longer a dream. It was a plan, and phase 1 was about to begin. The next 3 months were a blur of sawdust, paint fumes, and pure exhaustion. I didn't just manage the rehab. I was the rehab. I kept my barista job, worked the morning shift, then changed into paint-splattered clothes, and spent the next 10 hours at the condo. I learned how to rip out carpets, tear down cabinets, and patch drywall by watching hundreds of hours of DIY videos. I sanded, I painted, I scrubbed. My hands were perpetually sore, my nails were broken, and I had a fine layer of dust in my hair at all times. The contractor Carol recommended was a godsend for the plumbing and electrical, but I did everything else. My total rehab cost, by doing most of the labor myself, came in at just $15,000, money I'd gambled on zero-interest credit cards. Every swing of the hammer, every coat of paint, felt like a strike against Isabella DeLuca's condescending smile. They thought I was afraid of getting my hands dirty. They had no idea. Finally, it was done. The grimy little box was transformed into a bright, modern studio. I put it up for rent, and within a week, I had a tenant, a young nurse who was thrilled to have a clean, safe place to live. The rent was $1,200 a month. My mortgage was only $450. For the first time in my life, I had passive income. It was only a few $100s, but it felt like a river of cash. Now came the most crucial step, the refinance. This was the moment of truth. Carol had warned me. If the appraisal came in too low, my entire strategy would crumble. My down payment and all the rehab money would be locked in this one property, and the machine would stop before it even really started. The day the appraiser came, I was a nervous wreck. I had done everything right. I had comps for renovated units in the area. I had a signed lease. But it was completely out of my hands. A week later, Carol called. "Clara," she said, her voice unreadable. "I have the appraisal report." I held my breath. It came in at $125,000. I almost dropped the phone. $125,000. I had bought it for $70,000 and put $15,000 in. I had literally created $40,000 in equity out of thin air. Carol broke down the numbers. The credit union would give me a new loan for 80% of the appraised value, which was $100,000. That new loan would pay off my original mortgage of about $56,000, and it would pay back the $15,000 I'd put on credit cards. After all that, I would get a check, a tax-free check, because it was debt, not income. The check was for $29,000. I held that check in my hands and just started to cry. It wasn't just money, it was proof that the system worked. I had bought a property, fixed it, rented it, and pulled out my entire initial investment, plus a profit, and I still owned the asset, which was now paying for itself and putting money in my pocket every month. This was the repeat part of Brr. I now had my seed money back, plus more, and I was ready to hunt for the next deal. That first success became my blueprint. For the next 5 years, my life was a relentless cycle of rinse and repeat. I quit the bookstore but kept the barista job for the steady income to show the banks. I lived in a series of tiny, cheap apartments, pouring every ounce of capital and energy back into the business. Property 2 was a 2-bedroom I turned into a 3-bedroom. Property 3 was a duplex, my first multi-family. With each project I got smarter, faster, more efficient. I built a team of reliable contractors. I learned to read a neighborhood and spot the signs of gentrification before anyone else. I learned to negotiate with the confidence of someone who knew her numbers cold. By year 3, I had 5 units. By year 5, 12. I finally quit my barista job and formed an LLC, Phoenix Holdings. It sounded grand, but my headquarters was still a desk crammed into the corner of my tiny apartment. I was the CEO, acquisitions department, project manager, and janitor. The DeLucas had called me a gold digger. I found the term increasingly ironic. A gold digger takes. I was a builder. I was taking forgotten, unloved corners of the city and breathing life back into them. I was creating clean, safe homes for people. And I was creating wealth, not by marrying it, but by manufacturing it from drywall, tile, and sheer force of will. It wasn't easy. There were deals that fell through, contractors who disappeared, and tenants who trashed a place. I remember a pipe bursting in one of my buildings in the middle of the night, and I was the one there at 3 a.m. with a bucket, feeling completely overwhelmed. There were moments of doubt, moments I wondered if I was insane for taking on so much risk. Building an empire from scratch is a lonely, exhausting business. But then I would remember the rain, the click of the door, the laughter, and the fire would come roaring back. At the end of year 6, I had 30 units. My portfolio of small residential properties was worth several $1 million and was generating a significant monthly cash flow. I was financially secure beyond my wildest dreams. I could have stopped. I could have bought a nice house, traveled the world, and lived a life of leisure. But the goal was never just money. It was about the DeLuca Tower. I started to pivot. Scaling up with small properties was becoming inefficient. I needed to think bigger. I needed to move into commercial real estate. Commercial was a different league. The numbers were bigger, the leases were longer, and valuations were based purely on income. If you could increase a commercial building's net operating income, you could directly increase its value by millions. This was the big league. I spent a year educating myself. Just like in the beginning, I found a new mentor, a grizzled commercial real estate vet named Sam, who saw the same fire in my eyes that Carol had. He taught me about cap rates, triple net leases, and how to underwrite a $100 million deal. Under Sam's guidance, I made my first commercial acquisition, a small strip mall. It was a different animal, but the principles were the same. Find an undermanaged asset, increase its income, and force appreciation. I renegotiated leases, brought in better tenants, and within 18 months, the property's value had soared. My little company, Phoenix Holdings, was starting to get noticed. I was no longer the barista playing with condos. I was a serious player. I was building a track record. And then, one morning in my 8th year, I saw it. An industry news alert on my computer. DeLuca Properties to divest key asset. The DeLuca Tower. My heart stopped. The building, their crown jewel, the place they lived, the symbol of their entire dynasty, was for sale. Marcus DeLuca's empire was over-leveraged. A few bad bets in a down market, and they were being forced to sell their flagship building to cover their debts. The moment I had been working toward for 8 years had arrived. It wasn't a distant dream anymore. It was a deal on the table. A very, very big deal. A 9-figure deal. It was bigger than anything I had ever done. It would take every ounce of my capital, my credit, and my courage. I picked up the phone and called Sam. "It's on the market," I said, my voice steady. He knew exactly what I was talking about. "You ready for this, kid?" he asked. "This isn't just business for you. Don't let emotion cloud your judgment." "The emotion is what got me here," I said, "and my judgment is what will close the deal. Let's get to work. I want to underwrite this. I want to know everything about it. And then, I'm going to buy it." Buying a skyscraper isn't like buying a condo. It's a war fought on multiple fronts: finance, law, and psychology. The asking price for the DeLuca Tower was astronomical, a number that would have made the old me faint. But the new me, the me who had spent 8 years in the trenches of real estate, just saw it as a number, a problem to be solved. My team at Phoenix Holdings, now a handful of sharp analysts I'd hired, worked around the clock. We tore through the building's financials, analyzing every lease, every expense report, every maintenance record. What we found was a classic case of a lazy landlord. The DeLucas had owned the building for so long they'd grown complacent. Many commercial leases were way below market rate. Operating expenses were bloated. There was untapped potential everywhere. From a purely business perspective, it was a fantastic deal. The biggest challenge was financing. No single bank would touch a deal this size for a relatively new player like me. I had to syndicate it, bringing in a group of lenders. This is where my reputation became my most valuable asset. I had spent years building trust, deal by deal. I called in every favor. I leveraged every relationship. I pitched the deal not as a personal vendetta, but as a rock-solid investment opportunity. And then, my lawyer found it. The DeLucas' own residence, their multi-floor penthouse. They didn't own it. They had a long-term lease with their own building, a sweetheart deal with a rent that was a tiny fraction of its market value, an asset they were treating like a perk. The negotiations were brutal. We went back and forth with the DeLucas' bankers for months. They saw me as an upstart and tried to bully me, but I knew the building's numbers better than they did. I knew its weaknesses. I stood my ground. Finally, after a marathon 36-hour negotiation, we had a price. The weeks leading up to the closing were the most stressful of my life. A deal this big can fall apart in a second. I barely slept. I lived on coffee and adrenaline, the same fuel that had gotten me through that first condo rehab. On closing day, I sat in a sterile conference room, surrounded by lawyers and mountains of paper. I signed my name over and over until my hand cramped, and then it was done. A lawyer slid a final document across the table. "Congratulations, Ms. Evans! Phoenix Holdings is now the owner of the DeLuca Tower." I felt a strange sense of calm. I expected a rush of triumph, but instead, it was a quiet, profound sense of completion. The mountain I'd been climbing for 8 years was finally beneath my feet. I didn't storm up to their penthouse. I didn't make a scene. I had learned that the best revenge is served cold, and on official letterhead. The next day, a formal letter from my legal team was delivered to the DeLuca penthouse. It was a standard new owner introduction, sent to all tenants. It informed them of the change in ownership, provided new contact info for the management office, my office, and detailed where to direct future rent payments. I gave them a week to process it. Then, I went to see them. I took the private elevator up, the same one I'd been denied access to all those years ago. This time, it opened with a keycard from my own pocket. I knocked. A maid I didn't recognize answered. I asked for Mr. and Mrs. DeLuca. I was led into the same living room where I'd been humiliated. It looked smaller now, less intimidating. Isabella, Marcus, and Liam were there. They looked tired, defeated. The sale had clearly taken its toll. They looked at me, a flicker of confusion in their eyes, recognizing my face but unable to place it in this context. "Clara?" Liam said, his voice hesitant. "What are you doing here?" Isabella's eyes narrowed. "I believe this is a private residence," she said, her voice still icy, but now brittle. "It is," I said calmly, "and as the new owner of this building, I wanted to introduce myself personally and discuss the future of your tenancy." Silence. The color drained from Isabella's face. Marcus sat bolt upright. Liam just stared, his mouth slightly open, as if he were seeing a ghost. "You, what?" Marcus stammered. "My company, Phoenix Holdings, closed on the building yesterday," I explained, keeping my tone professional. "I'm your new landlord." I let the words hang in the air, watching the gears turn in their heads. disbelief warring with dawning, horrific realization. They had judged me, labeled me, and thrown me out, and I had spent every day since then, quietly, methodically working my way back, not to their door, but to the deed to their home. "I've reviewed your current lease agreement," I continued, pulling a folder from my briefcase. "It's very generous. Unfortunately, it's not sustainable for the building's new financial model." I placed the folder on the polished coffee table. "Your current lease expires in 60 days, I said, being precise. I wasn't there to illegally evict them. I was there to treat them like any other tenant. I won't be renewing it under the current terms. However, I am prepared to offer you a new, 1-year lease." I slid a single sheet of paper out. "This is the new monthly rate. It's the current fair market value for a unit of this size and location. It's the same rate per square foot I'll be asking from any new residential tenants." Liam picked up the paper, his hands shaking. I watched his eyes scan the figure. It was more than 20 times what they were currently paying. It was a number they likely could no longer afford. "This is outrageous," Isabella hissed. "This is our home." "It's a rental unit," I corrected her gently. "Unit 30. A beautiful one. And it can continue to be your home, provided the lease is signed and the rent is paid." The power in the room had been completely inverted. I was no longer the scared 24-year-old seeking their approval. I was the owner. I was in control. And my power wasn't inherited. It was earned. It was built. It was documented in 100 pages of closing documents in my office. Liam finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a look of utter, devastating comprehension. He finally understood. He finally saw me. "Why, Clara?" he whispered. "Why this?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of betrayal or the ache of a broken heart. I just felt distance. "You all taught me a very valuable lesson that night," I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. "You taught me that in your world, the only thing that truly matters is ownership. You accused me of wanting your money. You were wrong. I never wanted your money. I wanted my own. And I went out and got it." I stood up. "You have 30 days to decide if you'll be signing the new lease. My office will need your written decision. It was a pleasure to finally be formally introduced." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. As I walked to the elevator, I heard the faint sound of Isabella De Luca beginning to cry. It wasn't a sound of triumph. It was just a sound. The sound of an old world ending. The click of the elevator door sliding shut behind me was the only sound that mattered. Driving away from the De Luca Tower that day, I didn't feel the fiery satisfaction I had fantasized about for years. The revenge, now that it was complete, felt hollow. The real prize wasn't the look on their faces or owning their home. The real prize was the person I had to become to get there. The scared girl in the rain was gone. In her place was a woman who knew how to build, negotiate, and lead. A woman who had created a real estate empire from scratch. The De Lucas were just the catalyst. They were the flint that sparked the fire. But the fire itself, the empire I built, that was all mine. The ultimate revenge wasn't becoming their landlord. It was realizing my life was so much bigger than they ever were. They were now just tenants in a building I owned, a footnote in my story. My story wasn't about them anymore. It's about Phoenix Holdings, the communities I'm investing in, and the future I'm creating on my own terms. They tried to put a price tag on my dignity. They failed. Instead, they showed me how to buy the whole building. And for that, in a strange way, I suppose I should be grateful. My success is the one thing they can never take away from me. This journey taught me that sometimes, the worst moments of our lives are the ones that unlock our greatest potential. The moments that feel like an ending are actually the beginning of who we were always meant to be. What about you? Have you ever had a moment that felt like an ending, only to realize it was the start of something incredible? Share your story in the comments below. I read every one. And if you believe in the power of building your own future, Hit that subscribe button and join me. There's a lot more to build.